Now, the only permissible scientific conclusion that one can draw from these very easily verifiable data is that the amount of warming that CO2 and other greenhouse gases cause is a small, harmless and insignificant and even beneficial fraction of the range of estimates on which the UN's case is so inadequately and shakily founded. Next slide, please. And we can check our result, because it turns out that with these same satellites we can measure the relationship between changes in temperature at the surface of the sea and changes in the amount of radiation escaping into space. And if we do that analysis, what we find is that the models all predict that as the temperature, from left to right, rises, so the amount of radiation escaping is predicted by these Xbox 360s with the zitty teenagers driving them, to reduce the amount of radiation getting out of the top of the atmosphere. All the models do that. However, if we look at that central panel, next slide please, we will see what the actual satellite shows. At least I hope we will. Well, I'll tell you what it shows. What it shows is that far from the amount of radiation decreasing, I'm sorry we have lost the last two slides, it will in fact increase. More radiation gets out into space as the temperature warms up down here. And what does that mean? It's very simple what that means. It means it's not stopping down here to cause very much in the way of global warming. So now we know why the previous result, which we got by calculation, is correct. It's because the radiation simply isn't being trapped in the atmosphere in the way that the UN predicts. And my final slide, which alas is also missing, but I can do this for you very simply. Let's pretend that everything I've just said is rubbish, and that the UN is right all along, and that if you double the CO2 in the atmosphere, as we will do this century, despite what Al Gore and the others say about shutting down the economies of the West, let's double the CO2 in the atmosphere. Let's assume it causes 3.26 Kelvin or 5.9 Fahrenheit degrees of warming. That's the central estimate of the UN's climate panel. Let's pretend that they're right about that. All right. Then in how many years of shutting down not just the American economy, but the entire global carbon economy? Not a single automobile or motorcycle or train or aircraft moves anywhere. No coal-fired power stations, no oil-fired, no gas-fired. Shut it all down. Back to the Stone Age. And without even the right to light a carbon-emitting fire in your caves. How long would it take, shutting down the entire global economy, to forestall 1 Fahrenheit degree of global warming, even if the UN is right about how much warming CO2 causes? It's a very simple formula, which I'm not going to bore you with the detail of. I'll cut straight to the answer. It will take nearly a quarter of a century of shutting down the entire global economy in order to forestall 1 Fahrenheit degree of the warming that they say will come. But if I'm right, and if Professor Lindzen, whose slide I've just showed you, is right about the amount of global warming that we can expect from CO2, make that not 23 years, but 100 years of total global economic shutdown to forestall 1 Fahrenheit degree of warming. And that's why, economically as well as scientifically speaking, there is no case whatsoever for doing anything whatsoever to mitigate the emission of CO2. Even if it were not harmless and beneficial, as calculations increasingly in the literature show that it is, even then, it is orders of magnitude cheaper and more cost-effective to adapt to any climate change as and if and where it occurs, rather than spending trillions on futilely trying and failing to prevent it from occurring. It's really as simple as that. And when I gave that testimony, and that's all it was, just a few minutes, the deputy chairman of the committee said how sad it was that I hadn't produced a scientific argument. This is the caliber of people who, in the climate bill, which has been published since my testimony, are planning to shut down as much of the American economy as they possibly can over the next 20 years. Now, why are they doing this? Well, the clue came on the 15th of September last year with the secret publication of the draft Treaty of Copenhagen. And I got sent a copy by somebody who managed to wheedle it out in October last year, and I revealed what it said. What it said was they were going to set up a world government. The word government appears twice in this context in the treaty, the first time I've ever seen that kind of word in a treaty. And they were going to set up a world government using the climate as the excuse. And was this going to be a democratic world government? I didn't hear you. I still didn't hear you. That's better. No, it wasn't. The words democratic, election, ballot, and vote did not appear once in the 186 pages of that draft treaty. Here were people proposing to shut down the economies of the West, of course, the economies of Russia, China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, Africa, the rest of East Asia, totally untouched by this treaty. This treaty was and is, but they're still handing it out, designed to target the West and only the West. And why are they targeting the West on the basis of this bogus science and this bogus economics? I'll tell you why. Because they hate freedom. Now you may wonder why it is that a British, unelected, hereditary peer of the realm should be standing before an American audience talking about freedom and democracy. Well, I'll tell you why. It's because I love freedom. And I love America. And because you love freedom and you love America, and you have come here to stand up for freedom and for America, I love you. In the next few months, this entire global warming nonsense will be decided, and it will be decided here in the United States. If we can prevent that climate bill, which has just been published in the last couple of days by the Senate, from passing in the Senate and then from passing in the House, all we have to do is wait until the mid-term elections, and then we shall be able to do what you have all been praying to do for the last 2 years and vote them out. They have failed to get cap and trade through the Senate. In America, they have failed twice. Not America, I'm sorry, they have failed here, but also Australia, they have failed twice. And now the government has abandoned its proposals for cap and trade. In Europe, the dictatorship has imposed cap and trade on us, but it has collapsed twice. The first time because the price of a carbon emission right collapsed to zero because they allowed every country to grant itself more emissions permits than the emissions it was already making. They had forgotten that the law of supply and demand does apply even to bogus carbon trading.